Jane, I would be ever so grateful if you would take a picture of me while I'm up here so that I could show it to my mother. Because she doesn't quite believe that people actually come to hear her Bobby. Just so she'll know that the son that she was sure would not amount to anything. So sometime during if you could go to the back and
well, I think we have it.
And make it so that it makes it look double the size.
Right. Okay.
Well, what I wanted to add was when Jane shared that story, I'd never heard it before, and when she shared that story, it occurred to me that they felt impressed to pray for 2 years. And then when this person said, I believe today is going to be released to us, or the place, and they went to the estate agent, and the estate agent said, well, yes, it came up for rent 48 hours ago. But they started praying 2 years earlier. Did you get that?
Yes.
What's that about? Well, simply this. In Youth of the Mission, I had a teacher from New Zealand named Joy Dawson. She was quite well known in the 70s and 80s. And she used to tell us students, she says, God's delays are not God's denials. God's delays are not God's denials. We need to just keep at it. Yeah. Has anyone opened in prayer?
That's for you to do.
Oh, for me to do.
In Hebrew. Choose which language.
אדון הכבוד, אנחנו מודים לך מקרב לב עבור הזמן הזה עם האחים והאחיות שלי כאן מ-CMJ וגם האורחים שהגיעו היום. אנחנו מבקשים את נוכחותך בינינו. אנחנו זקוקים לרוח קודשך. תדריך אותנו, אבא. תפתח את ליבנו. הדברים שאני עכשיו רוצה לדבר עליהם, זה בא דרך התגלות, ואנחנו באמת צריכים וזקוקים לרוח הקודש. ואנחנו מבקשים זאת בשם ישוע המשיח. אמן. Amen. Well, can we, it's 2:25. Is there a coffee break in the middle?
No, we've had it.
We've had the coffee break.
Yeah.
So we go straight through to 6.
Yeah. That'll be fine. That's tea to 6.
Tea at 6. Okay, so I've got you for, 3.5 hours. All right. So it's too bad you showed up for this particular lecture. We've been having a wonderful time talking about God's heart for the Jewish people and the amazing things that are going on in Eretz Yisrael, Latov ve'Yafa, good old Israel. And last night was a high point. That was really a blessed time in Manchester. And it's actually hard for me to shift gears to talk about this subject. But I'll endeavor to do so. My connection with CMJ goes back. I'm an American. I left America at age 3, but then did university and graduate school much later in life there. I'm bilingual, well, trilingual. But what I mean is I grew up with 2 languages, English, which I spoke with my father, Hebrew with my mother, and attended Israeli schools. The last 40 years, since 1978, well, it's 41 years now, my wife and I have been working in the Arab Muslim world. But the CMJ connection, the church's ministry among Jewish people, for me started when I was a boy, where every summer my parents would send me off to Stella Carmel to the CMJ summer camp, which Ronald Aidney and his wife ran, and Uncle John and some others who some have gone on to glory. And of course I knew Henry Knight, and then much later Walter Riggins showed up, And I actually was a member of Emmanuel House congregation and was sent out of Emmanuel House congregation in 1978, prayed out into the Arab Muslim world from Tel Aviv, where I was raised. That's a CMJ property. Those of you who have been there, it's a CMJ congregation.
No, it better is Bet Emmanuel.
Bet Emmanuel, you know it better as Bet Emmanuel.
Yeah.
And so from my father, he worked for 30 years in Tel Aviv at Dugit. And perhaps you've heard of Dugit. The last person he hired before he retired was Avi Mizrahi, who's taken Dugit Ministries to a whole nother level. Tremendous work. My mother was a homemaker, raised 4 children in a small town north of Tel Aviv called Tzahala. Tzahala is an acronym, IDF, Israel Defense Forces. In Hebrew, Tzva Hagana L'Israel. And in addition to being a homemaker, my mother was a linguist, and she helped translate the New Testament into modern Hebrew. So everybody that was part of that project had a PhD, except for my mother, it was simply Mrs. Sally Sacker. So a very gifted woman. She was actually a woman of science, had gone to study medicine at Johns Hopkins University. Baltimore, no one even knew she had any kind of gift for language, but she did. And she was also part of a panel that came up with new Hebrew words for the emerging messianic movement that didn't exist in modern Hebrew. Very proud of my mother, who's 93, still with us. Dad died and went to heaven while we were on tour in France. And oddly enough, I was speaking to Jane wanted me to meet an Israeli who had a little shack in the middle of nowhere in Normandy. I mean, his primary residence was in Paris, but he had this literally a shack. And we were talking. It turned out that he grew up just a block away from where Dad's office was, on the corner of Frischmann and Dizengoff. And we're talking about the old days growing up. And then I got back to my room. It turns out my dad died right when we were talking to this Israeli guy from Tel Aviv, which I thought was very poignant, because that's who my dad had gone to reach. Spent 30 years of his life. So that's my CMJ connection, and I'll talk more about CMJ towards the end of this presentation. Now, why would you have a non-Muslim like myself come and talk about Islam? It's not my religion. Wouldn't it be better? Wouldn't it be fairer to bring a Muslim to talk about his or her own faith? I would think so. But there is a good reason why I'm speaking on this subject. One is because Jane made me. Several people already have asked me, so Robert, how is the tour going? And I said, well, it's really hard to keep up with Jane. She has twice the energy I do. I don't know how she travels 25,000 miles a year and does what she does, but somehow she does, and somehow she's included me in this tour, even though she knows I don't have quite the stamina that she does. She's been very gracious. Late nights, early mornings, she goes for it. And then even after a long presentation like this afternoon, she'll go and visit with people and talk with them and share with them. And Jane Malspin is an example of me who keeps the main thing, and gives all that she has for what she does. And where I live in Beirut, Lebanon, there's not one colleague that I work with that works as hard as you do. It's the truth. It's the truth. I thought I'd say all this because there are C&J people here. I don't normally say all of that. But it's absolute truth. But the reason why you're having a non-Muslim talk about Islam is because it concerns me. What do I mean by that? Well, Islam is not a new religion. Islam is a corrective. It's a corrective. Muhammad doesn't say he started a new religion. He came to bring a correction. What do I mean by that? Well, that scroll that you have, by the way, that's a beautiful exhibit back there. Lovely mural of Jerusalem. Incredible. And the scroll there and a few other parchments. So beautiful. And Muhammad claimed that those parchments that you see in the back there have been corrupted. That the Jewish people corrupted their scriptures. In addition, the Christians corrupted the New Testament. For example, all references to Muhammad have been removed. And there are other proofs. For example, the idea that David would commit adultery with Bathsheba. That's clearly a sign that the Bible's corrupted. Or that Lot had sex with his own daughters. Absolutely clear indication that the Bible is corrupted by the Jewish people. Because no prophet of Allah would behave in such a manner. So he saw it as a corrective, not as a new religion. The other thing is about Muhammad is that Islam's main concern. Well, let me ask you a question, and this is not a rhetorical question. Feel free to answer this. But for Christians, what is humankind's biggest problem? One word answer.
Sin.
Thank you. Sin. Very good. Let's see. Hold on. Aldridge. Robin Aldridge. There we go. That's correct. Thank you, Robin. But for Islam, the biggest problem that humankind has is not sin, but ignorance. Ignorance. That is the problem. And it doesn't help if your scriptures have been corrupted. And so Allah in His mercy sent an illiterate city boy by the name of Muhammad from the city of Mecca to bring correction. And that's why you don't convert to Islam. For example, when Prime Minister Tony Blair's sister-in-law converted to Islam, she didn't describe herself as a convert. She called herself a revert. Because we're all Muslims. Starting from Adam, Jesus himself was a Muslim. But, where did I sit? Just my computer. So, because we're all Muslims, you don't convert to Islam. You were born a Muslim. However, you haven't been enlightened yet. Okay? So, you were born in Japan, and so you, let's say, are an atheist or Shinto, but you're really a Muslim. And so when you receive the light, when you receive the truth of Islam, you are not a convert, you are a revert. You're just becoming an enlightened Muslim. So everyone in this room is a Muslim. Islam is the Arabic word for submission. That's what the word means. And a Muslim is a submitter. Islam means submission. A Muslim is a submitter. So the reason why I have no problems talking about a religion that's not my religion is because it has a lot to say about me. 5 times a day, Muslims have a declaration. 5-time prayers. 5-time daily prayers. And in that religious formula, it says, lead us in the straight path, not like those who've gone astray. So 5 times a day, they talk about me. The ones who've gone astray are the Jewish people and Christians. Lead us in the straight path, not like those who have gone astray. 5 times a day, Muslims reference us, Jews and Christians. Because the people of the book, which is one of the terms used for the Jewish people and for Christians, have corrupted God's word in the book. They have gone astray. And in addition to the examples I already gave you, one sign of corruption, I mentioned David, I mentioned Lot, would be the Trinity. The Trinity. That's clearly. And so that part of the confession of a Muslim is God does not beget, nor is he begotten. God has no son. Who said this? Gabriel said it. But what did Gabriel tell the Jewish teenager in Nazareth by the name of Miriam? What did he say? What? You shall bear. But 600 years later, the same angel, Gabriel, shows up to an Arab in Arabia and says, God has no son. Now, what you find out in Jewish and Christian and Muslim dialogue, or let's just say Christian-Muslim dialogue, which has been going on for 1,400 years. I asked one of my professors, he was heavily involved in peace, justice, reconciliation, and dialogue initiatives, and I said, well, he's passed on, but he was a well-known professor. I won't say his name, but well-known professor. And so I said to him, Professor so-and-so, you're very active, I see. In your free time, you're in this Christian-Muslim dialogue. He said, yes, Robert. I said, well, what do you get out of it, sir? He said, I can usually get a good cup of tea. And why has this dialogue been going on for so long without any really... I suppose because it's better than killing each other. But clearly we can't square the circle. It's impossible. It's impossible. And it's a minefield, which is one reason why Jane has asked us not go on the internet. I'll give you an example. I'd forgotten about this. So I had to go look this up on St. Google. But there was a speech that Pope Benedict gave. Pope Benedict the 16th, was it? He gave a speech in his native German in Germany, Regensburg, and it was elite to elite. I mean, it wasn't open to the press. And in it, he's the subject of his lecture is faith and reason. And while he's talking about faith and reason, he gives an example from an emperor, a Byzantine emperor from 1391, who was talking to a Muslim about Islam. And the Pope quotes the emperor as saying to his Muslim counterpart, quote, "Show me just what Muhammad brought that was new, and there you will find things only bad and inhuman, such as his command to spread by the sword, the faith he preached." This is AD 1391. Now, what all the Pope was trying to say is that he considered it irrational, the idea of forced conversion as irrational. He probably thought he was safe quoting something that had been uttered 700 years earlier. He was pointing out the apparently contradictory passages in the Quran. On one hand, it says there's no compulsion in religion. That's a verse you need to take in context, though. There's no compulsion in religion. And the other being that it's acceptable, quote, to spread the faith through violence, close quote. And the Pope was simply saying that the latter teaching, that you can spread faith through violence, is unreasonable. And he was advocating that religious conversion should take place not through compulsion, but through reason. Not through compulsion, but by reason. Oh my goodness. Somebody was there with an iPhone or something and recorded it and released it, and it was everywhere in the print and broadcast media. Where I live, in Arabic, it was all over the English. Everywhere. French, it was just 2006, it was the shot heard across the world. And the Vatican had to backpedal. I mean, he didn't deny that he said it, but he said, please take it in context. I'm just saying that this is an old discussion. Didn't help. And then the Prime Minister of England weighed in. The President of the United States the President of France weighed in. Some people were pro, some people were con. how could the Pope possibly talk this way? And others were saying, well, the Pope was just making a point. Anyway, it was a mess. So all I'm saying is, this subject is one of the hot button issues of our day. Islam. And I have talked to people that are a lot smarter than I am. They work for the FCO in your country. And they can finish my sentences for me. And I wonder, well, why aren't they standing up here and saying this? And there are many reasons, but one of the main reasons is that we don't want to have war with 1.5 billion people on this planet. When George Bush got up at the Washington Cathedral after the catastrophe of September 11, 2001, where 19 Arab Muslim men, including one Lebanese, perpetrated the greatest attack on American soil in its history. 3,000 people died in a single morning. Manhattan, Twin Towers, a field in Pennsylvania, and, of course, the Pentagon in Washington. And then George Bush gets up and he says, Islam is a religion of peace. Why did he do that? Does he know something about Islam? Why did his advisors write that speech and ask the President of the United States to give it? I don't know. If I'm invited to his ranch in Texas or his second home in Maine, I would really like to ask him, what were you thinking? Or why did your advisors advise you to make that statement? I think he would say to me, Robert, I was frightened of the reaction. I was frightened of American vigilantism. That some American would go out and the next Arab Muslim they found, they would just shoot that person dead. I think that's probably what he would say. But because he said that, it's made life quite difficult. How do I mean? Well, because it's hard to really talk about Islam now, as it really is, because the narrative we've adopted is it's a religion of peace. Now, what religion, I don't know of one, but I'll ask you, what world religion is there today which says if you shift your allegiance from your religion to another religion, that's a capital offense? I don't know of one. Hinduism, they believe in 300 million gods, and you come and preach the gospel, and hey, we'll make Jesus another god. Why not? No big deal. I mean, who cares? But Islam, and all 4 schools of Sharia all agree that a man or a woman that shifts their allegiance from Muhammad to something else has committed 2 mistakes. 1, apostasy against religion, and treason against the state. Because Islam is different than our faith in that it is a... what happened to my first slide? If we could go back to the first...
I thought you wanted to
jump in. No, go back to the map. Let's go back. Islam is... well, I'll translate it for you. Islam din wa dawla, which means Islam is state and religion. Or Islam din wa dawla ta'waman, which means Islam is state and religion are twins. In other words, there's no separation of mosque and state. If you're taking notes, no separation between mosque and state. Well, that's entirely different than our faith. Well, Jesus said, render to Caesar's what Caesar's and God. Now, this map here, I borrowed from David Garrison. I like this map because normally you find a map like this and it's all green, because green is the color of Islam. In fact, in the last Muslim empire, which ended in Caliphate ended in 1923, Jews and Christians were not allowed to wear green in certain Muslim societies, because you could tell what faith you were, what faith community you were from by the clothes that you wore. So if there was green, you could assume that that person was Muslim, because Jews and Christians weren't allowed to wear the color green. But I like this, although you can see the homeland of the Arabs, Arabia, isn't green, but the rest of it is not. And I just want you to understand how Islam spread. It didn't just spread by the sword. For example, it spread in Africa not through the sword, but through slavery. The Arabs were the first slavers. The President of the United States, the former President, Barack Hussein Obama, is part of a Muslim tribe in Kenya. It's only 10%. But in other words, they're a very small minority, the Muslims in Kenya. And his father was part of that 10%. Because in Mombasa was a big slave trading area. But it didn't spread through the sword there. Or look over here to the east. The largest Muslim country in the world, as you probably know, is Indonesia. It didn't spread through the sword there. It spread through trade. So Islam doesn't necessarily, when we say jihad does not mean war. Jihad means struggling to expand Allah's kingdom on earth. It can be with a sword, but it doesn't necessarily have to be with a sword. So, this is too small for you to read, but the Arab world, Indo-Malaysian, Turkic world, West Africa, and so on. Okay, next slide. You know, I've worked so hard to keep. I don't know what to do to keep these. So you're missing a whole thing. Oh, gee. Sorry about that. Are we using the
updated, I think.
The updated? It should say revised. It does say revised. Well, isn't that a curious thing? All right. So it's a world system. I don't mean as an economic system. The shared traditions that all Muslims have are the 5 pillars: the Quran, the Hadith, Sharia, and Muhammad. Next slide. Now, this religion, this world religion, which again, Muhammad didn't start a religion any more than the Catholic monk Martin Luther started Lutheranism. He was not starting a religion, he was bringing a corrective to Judaism and Christianity. He called it Islam. So, Muhammad divided the whole world in Dar al-Harb, which means war. Not jihad. Jihad doesn't mean war. Harb, H-A-R-B. I'm sorry that it's not showing properly on the screen. The Muslims divide the whole world between the Dar al-Harb, where Islam is not, and the Dar al-Islam, where Islam rules and reigns. That's how they see the world. This is Orthodox Islam. These are their terms. The abode of war, where Islam is not yet established, and the abode of Islam, where Islam rules and reigns.
So Sunni and Shia would agree.
Yes, on that they would agree. Now, our ancestors, we're having to relearn all of this. But our ancestors knew this. Martin Luther, I just mentioned him, I'll mention him again. Martin Luther used to write tracts saying that the Saracens, which is referring to Arab Muslims. There are 2 terms that they used back then. The Moors, which are non-Arab Muslims, and the Saracens, which are ethnic Arab Muslims. It would have been much easier if they would have said Muslims. But anyway. So next time you come across these terms, Moors and Saracens, you'll know what it's talking about. But Martin Luther said that the jihad, he knew the word. The jihad against Christendom, because there weren't nation states in those days. It was called Christendom. There was no Germany. Was God's judgment on the church. Much like God used Assyria and Babylon to judge his own people. But the European experience with Islam is a very old one. 1,000 years of jihad from the 8th to the 17th centuries. For example, the Arabs sacked Rome in AD 846. They established an emirate in Sicily, which lasted for 250 years. After getting established in the Iberian Peninsula, there was one holdout near where Portugal is, but essentially the whole peninsula. They crossed the Pyrenees Mountains into France. And you know the story. Charles the Hammer, Charles Martel, who was able to turn the Arab Muslims back at the battles of Tours and Poitiers. And they went back over the Pyrenees, back over into the Iberian Peninsula, where they remained for 800 years. It took 800 years to end the Arab-Muslim occupation of Spain. It took 800 years for the indigenous population to finally get strong enough to expel the Arab settlers. And that happened in the year 1492. And while they were expelling the Arab Muslims, who else did they expel that same year? Thank you. What else happened in 1492? Columbus sailed the ocean blue. But who paid for that? Who paid for that trip? Did Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand pay for that? No. It was paid with confiscated Jewish wealth. While we're kicking you out, we want your bank accounts. And so that's how Columbus discovered Costa Rica or whatever it was he discovered. It wasn't India. And this is a side, this is not part of my lecture, but it's a curious thing to me. The Jews actually spread out from Spain, and some went north and some went east. And those that went north ended up in places like Holland. Spinoza, for example. You've heard of the name Spinoza. He was in Amsterdam. These were people that were expelled in 1492. They went up to Northern Europe, Central and Northern Europe. And many went east. Why did they go east? Because they wanted to go back to Jerusalem. They wanted to go back to their homeland. No, that's not why. Because the Sultan invited them. He'd heard what happened. He said, hey, why don't you come over here? And so they did, in their thousands. Places like Smyrna, which is today called Izmir, Thessaloniki in northern Greece, Macedonia, Constantinople, but not Jerusalem, curiously enough. Even though Jerusalem was under 100% under Muslim control. In other words, the Sultan who had invited the Jews to the Caliphate, they could have gone back to Jerusalem. And I really don't know. I'm sure there's a book written about it. If you happen to know, please let me know. I'd be curious to know why it is that the Jews didn't go back to Jerusalem, but instead went to these other places. I know there's somebody that's done a PhD dissertation on that. I just haven't found it yet. But if you happen to know, I'd be delighted to hear. But isn't that a curious thing when you think about it? The other thing that happened was that the Mediterranean became a Muslim sea. Now, Arabs are not seafarers, but they learned very quickly as they conquered. They learned quite quickly and were able to interrupt European shipping and even pilgrimages to the Holy Land. Next slide. So the Quran is the backbone of Islam, Islam being the religion of submission, Muslims being the submitters, and Muhammad would be the body. The Quran was revealed helter-skelter over a period of 23 years. Some of it was memorized, some of it was written down on pieces of leather, pieces of wood, for a period of 23 years. And it was eventually compiled into an official canon by one of the successors of Muhammad by the name of Uthman. He destroyed all variant versions of the Quran. Well, how can there be variant versions of the Quran? Because the Quran is much different than our Bible, much different than the Old Covenant and the New Covenant. And that the Bible is written by men and women who are moved by the Holy Spirit. In other words, it's a very human document over a period of 3,000 years. Not so the Quran. The Quran is a direct revelation from God himself via Gabriel to an Arab illiterate. The Muslims claim that he was illiterate. Why a successful businesswoman, Khadija, at age 45 would marry a young man in his 20s who's illiterate, I don't know. But perhaps it's to make the miracle of the Quran that much greater. How could it be the product of Muhammad because he's illiterate? So it has to be a divine revelation. Whatever. Next slide. But now, that's a screenshot. You don't have to read the Quran through a book. You can now access it through a computer. And you can also access all the commentaries and the hadith and sharia And these are terms I'll explain shortly. Next. This was in the news 2 weeks ago, Thomas Jefferson's Quran. Why was it in the news? Could you go one more forward? Because two congresswomen, Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, announced that they were going to be sworn in as congresswomen using Thomas Jefferson's Quran. I don't know if they actually did. I know that the first Muslim, George Ellis, did, but whether they did or not, I don't know. But anyway, they announced that they were going to use Thomas Jefferson's Quran to show the American people that Islam has always been a part of American history. And Obama was the first one to promote that narrative. That Islam has always been a part of the American story. That was news to me. If you want to be technical and say, well, some of the slaves that were brought to America happened to be Muslim, okay, I get that. But to say that Islam was contributed to American society the way the Judeo-Christian civilization did, that's a stretch. Back to can we go reverse? Okay, so what happened was, now where was this published? Can you read it from back there? London. There it is. So it says, the Al-Quran, translated into English immediately from the original Arabic, with explanatory notes taken from the most approved commentators. And by George Sale, gentleman. And then the date, 1734. So what was Thomas Jefferson doing with the Quran in his personal library in Virginia, which he purchased in London? Simply this. America was a young nation, and they were trading across the Atlantic. Clipper ships would go back and forth between Boston and other ports, all the way, not just to Europe, but all the way to Constantinople and to Smyrna, Izmir today. And at a certain point, American clipper ships were being intercepted by the sultans who ruled all along the North African coast. Yes, there's one caliph. He sat in Constantinople, but he devolved political power because the Muslim empire was so enormous. Think about it. No telephones, no telegraph. He had sultans that looked over vast areas. So these sultans were under his authority and had to pay taxes to Constantinople. But these sultans in North Africa, I'm referring, by North Africa, I mean Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco. Did I leave one out? And so these American clipper ships were coming across the North African coast, heading east to the eastern Mediterranean. And the Arab Muslims were attacking them. And they were stealing their goods, the Americans' goods, and they were kidnapping the sailors, bringing them ashore and holding them hostage for ransom. And they would take the ships as well. So America tried diplomacy. And they talked, and Thomas Jefferson asked one of the emissaries of the Sultan, why are you doing this? Now, British shipping wasn't touched, because Britain was the superpower of the day, and they knew better than to attack a British ship. But America was a very young and poor nation. Easy pickings. So Thomas Jefferson, not just him, but John Adams and others, they asked these people, why are you doing this? And they said, because you're infidels. We're what? Well, you're infidels. What is that? And they would explain to these American statesmen that as Muslims, they have permission to raid the ships of infidels and confiscate their wealth. You do? That's when Thomas Jefferson purchased his Quran in London, took it back and read it. And what happened is that America kept paying ransom for these sailors, and pretty soon the treasury was being depleted. It's a question of money. They were running out of money. And that's when America decided to stop diplomacy and use violence. They resorted to violence. And they established the United States Marines. These are soldiers that go on ships. And they protected the ships. It didn't work. They'd come by the North African coast, the Arabs would attack and overwhelm the Marines. So finally, America decided to increase the violence. And the United States government told the Marines, okay, we want you to invade and attack. And that's what they did. The United States Marines, a very young country, attacked the Arab Muslims in North Africa, and they started killing. And they didn't stop killing. The Marines kept killing until the Sultan or Sultan said, all right, you're stronger, you win. And they stopped. Curiously, America's first foreign policy crisis as a young nation had to do with the Muslim world. And it's in the Marine Anthem. If you know the Marine Anthem. From the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli, we'll fight our nation's battles on land and sea. Whatever. I'm not a Marine. But yeah, it's in the Marine. It's actually in the Marine Anthem, referring to America's first foreign policy crisis. So that's why now you can go to the next. So it wasn't because they're saying, well, look, if Thomas Jefferson had a Quran, that's proof that Islam has always been part of the American story. No, I've just given you the context. All right, next slide. Let's back up one. This is another PowerPoint that I did on Charles and Diana. So sorry. As I said, the Quran was revealed over a period of 23 years. Osman decided to have a canon because some of those that had committed the Quran to memory were killed in battle. And so he put this together. And the variants that were burned by Osman, some survived into the last century. By last century, I mean the 20th century. We have variants that turned up in Damascus and variants that turned up in Yemen. And textual criticism is going on right now, today, by qualified scholars in secret and publishing under pseudonyms. That's how sensitive this subject is. Because if you're going to show that it's a human document, that it's undone. And if you're talking to your British neighbor who's a Muslim, they absolutely believe it's a divine document. And oddly enough, this is an issue of projection, because theirs is a divine document. They think the Bible is revealed the same way, because they don't know anything about our faith. The other thing is, because the Quran is so abbreviated, it's the length of the New Testament. 1/3 is the retelling of Old Testament stories. I mentioned 2 Old Testament figures already. Lot is big in the Quran for some reason. Lot. But other biblical people, I mentioned David, for example. But 1/3 is a retelling of Old Testament stories, not always accurately. 1/3 is a retelling of New Testament stories, not always accurately, and it adds some things that are not recorded in our New Testament scriptures. And then 1/3 concerns 7th century Arabian culture, for example, laws of inheritance, divorce, and so on. But it's a very small book. And because Islam is a religion which says humanity's problem is lack of guidance due to ignorance, this is a problem. So they've come up with a whole body called the Hadith, but actually it should be called Ahadith because it's a plural. Hadiths. Shouldn't be singular. Hadiths with the S at the end. Hadith in Arabic. They've had to come up because you want to live and emulate the perfect man. Muhammad is what we call in Arabic ma'asum. Ma'asum means infallible, perfect. And because there's not very much there in the Quran, how are you going to know how the perfect man lived? So there's a whole body of oral a tradition. For example, Bukhari, you'll see a slide in a minute. Bukhari, he went through 600,000 purported sayings of Muhammad, and he distilled it to a little over 7,000. But there's more. That's just Bukhari. There's Sahih Muslim. There's 6 other main hadiths. And these were the first biography of Muhammad was written 150 to 200 years after Muhammad died in AD 632. In other words, there were no living witnesses. How many people saw the risen Messiah, Yeshua? 500 plus. Am I right? Okay. Now, there was a time when New Testament criticism came about, started in Germany, spread throughout Western countries in the late 19th century. There was a time where it was very clear that the Gospels were not written in Yeshua's lifetime, but a long time after. And so they weren't reliable for that reason, because they weren't eyewitness accounts. And then one day, a German theologian, it occurred to him, he said, wait a minute. They had to be contemporary. And why do you think he thought that? Because there's no mention of the destruction of the temple that happened in AD 70. And in fact, the letter to the Galatians wouldn't even make sense if the temple wasn't standing. And overnight, that whole train, or I can't think of inquiry, dried up overnight. Everyone had to concede the point. Yeah, that's right. It can't be they have to be contemporary. And that's tremendous. Because that means we have eyewitness accounts, what we're reading in our scriptures. Where's the oldest piece of New Testament scripture in the world today? Manchester. Thank you. Manchester. That's right here in your country. But isn't that amazing? But in Muhammad's case, in the case of Islam, there was no one to interview. There was no one. And so how do we even know what's true or not? Let me give you an example. I'm saying to you that your New Testament was written within a generation, or at the most 50 years. 50 years after the ascension of our Lord Jesus. 50 years. What is 50 years? Here's 50 years. Go ahead. Let's look at the next slide. Who remembers this? Yeah, next slide. I remember that he gave the speech in Welsh. Who remembers that? Well, look at that. We have eyewitness. Wonderful. Next slide. The troubles that broke out in 1968. And every single day in 1969, it was in the paper or the television. Who remembers that? Everyone. The impromptu concert on the roof of Abbey Studios in January 1969, 50 years ago. I remember it like yesterday. And then the Abbey Road album was released later in the year. Who remembers? 1969, the Concorde took to the sky. It's only 50 years ago. Next. Woodstock. You're going to hear a lot about that because it's the 50-year anniversary this year of Woodstock. And they're going to find people that were conceived during that time who are now 50 years old. Think about that. And of course, everyone that says that they were at Woodstock obviously weren't there. Because if you remember Woodstock, then you weren't there. Yeah, there they were. It was a friend of mine I was in university with. He actually drove from his home in Connecticut to upstate New York to the concert. He got there. It was a muddy mess. He turned around and drove home. That's the whole thing. Anyway, next. Yeah, who remembers this? Well, that's 1969, 50 years ago. Of course, we remember it like yesterday. Next, Armstrong on the moon. Yeah, okay. Well, this here, the Sunnah, the Sunnah is derived from the sayings, oral sayings of Muhammad. Look at how many volumes there are. None of it is contemporary. This was compiled after he died. And it's all kinds of, because he's the perfect man, a Muslim wants to imitate. Remember, the problem is not sin. It's not a sin problem. It's an ignorance problem. So we need to emulate the Arab prophet as close as we can. So Muhammad said when you enter a room, you should enter with your right foot. Or you cross the lintel of a door, you enter with your right foot. When you enter the toilet or the loo or whatever you call it here, you use your left foot. Okay? Little minutia like that. That's what these are full of. Okay, next slide. So here's Bukhari, Sahih Bukhari. He's the one that went through 600,000. He lived hundreds of years after Muhammad. And he distilled it to around 7,000 or so sayings. Bukhari, then Sahih Muslim. These are the two most important. And Muslims, it's on the same level as the Quran, which is hard for us to understand. Because we come from a tradition that's sola scriptura. Isn't that what Martin Luther said? Sola scriptura. It's not that way in Islam. Because these are the words of the perfect man. So it has the same authority. Next. Now, we can understand what this is about right from our iPhone. You type in www.sunnah.com, and in English, you don't even have to learn Arabic now. In English, you can find out what Islam teaches on a variety of issues. Let's keep going. For example, the 5 pillars of Islam. It's not found in the Quran. If we didn't have the Sunnah, if we didn't have the Hadith, we wouldn't have the 5 pillars. Let me repeat this. It's not in the Quran. It was derived from this body of literature which was compiled way after he was gone. And you know the 5 pillars. The Hajj, the Zakat, the 5 times prayer, the fasting Ramadan, and Shahada. I've never seen Ramadan referred to in the English language without the modifier holy in front of it. The holy month of Quran. Never have. Pick up your times. Well, you look like people that read The Guardian. But look at The Guardian. It always says the holy month of Ramadan. Always. But it's not in Arabic. It's not called holy at all. It's called Ramadan Kareem, which means the generous Ramadan. And there are all kinds of jokes about that. It's no fun to fast. But it's not really a fast. I fasted Ramadan for a number of years to get into the flow of the Muslim community I was in. I wasn't doing it for spiritual reasons. But it's just not a good idea to eat a Jacob's Club bar in front of somebody that's fasting. Oh, it's not a Jacob's Club bar anymore. It's a McVitie's, right? Didn't they buy them out? But you get the point. So actually, it's not a month fast. It's simply a month where day becomes night and night becomes day. In other words, the activities you did in the daytime, you do at night. That's why we gain weight in Ramadan. We don't lose weight. And it's a real stress on the family budget. The food budget goes up, and then traditionally you buy new clothes at the end of Ramadan. It's actually quite stressful unless you're a person of means or a family of means. But it's not a time. Don't think, oh, this is the time I'm going to lose 4 stone. No, it doesn't work that way. So again, whatever you do in the daytime, you do at night. What you did at night, you do in the daytime. And heaven help you if you are a business person. My daughter is a businesswoman in Dubai. Has been there 9 years. And she basically told me, she said, Daddy, down here, the month of Ramadan is just a write-off. And we just go on vacation or down. People aren't in the offices. They're not doing it. It affects the economy as well, not just families. Okay, what's the last one? Yes, and the Shahadi, that there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. Next. So the Gospels and the life of Christ are public. There's no volumes upon volumes about that Jesus preferred falafel over shawarma, or how he brushed his teeth or used the bathroom. It's not there. The Sunnah has that. The Sunnah, you can type in how Muhammad used the bathroom. And so Muhammad would urinate by squatting. You know, he wouldn't urinate against a wall or a tree or the back wheel of his car. No, he would squat. And so you want to emulate the most perfect person. So you urinate squatting. Are you getting the picture? Okay. So, but in the Gospels, we don't have that. We're not concerned with that. And it's all there in the open. You don't have to be some sort of scholar to find out, how this was done. No. Okay, but the primary sources have been hard to access, but this is changing. Why? Because of the computer and because of translation. Only a few have the skills.
Can I just ask you something?
Yes.
We work sometimes in the local prison. Guy who became a Muslim. He said, "Why did you become a Muslim?" He said, "Because the Quran has never been translated into any other languages in its original Arabic language. The Bible has been translated into different versions, and therefore it has been corrupted." So for Muslims, they're not quite as open, are they, as we are, to saying, you can have different translations of the Quran. They hold fast, don't they, to the Arabic original.
Well, I don't engage in polemics, but if you want to, you can educate yourself on the Ottoman canon and how variant versions of the Quran were out there. Okay. And they were burned by Osman. And he came up with his King James version of the Quran. Your friend may not be aware of that history. So that it's out there. If you want to take that tact. But I know this. I can get to a point where I know more about Islam than the Muslim that's standing in front of me. They're not convinced. For one thing, I'm getting ahead of myself, but it's forbidden to question the revelation of Muhammad. It's forbidden. I've been in situations where we were down in southern Lebanon visiting with Shiites, and in the course of conversation, which was in Arabic, of course, we were talking about some sensitive issues. A guy got up and went to use the loo, and he took a long time in the loo. And so finally we said to our host, I said, "Where's Muhammad?" He said, he went home. He went home. Because in that culture, you always excuse yourself. You don't just get up from the carpet and leave. You say, "By your leave," or "I've got to go now. Enjoyed seeing you," and then you leave. You don't just walk out. And I said, "Why did he do that?" He said, "Well, he was concerned that he might be sinning. Just being in a room where people were questioning Muhammad and Islam is a sin." That's something to keep in mind. There are several verses in the Quran that say, "Do not doubt this revelation." Okay. So this is changing. Accurate information can cause offense. Absolutely. I've spoken truth, and I'm lucky I kept my head on my shoulders. But you know what? Muslims are losing control of the narrative because of the internet. There was a time before computers where they could keep the world at bay, and they could keep their version of Islam, whether it's Sunnism or Shiism, pure. But that's very difficult now. Anybody, anywhere in the world, can just do a search on their iPhone. But Islam actually has been under pressure, not just from that. Islam is a house divided from the first day, because when Muhammad died in 632. That very day, there was a split among the Arabs as to whether the successor, in the Arabic word for successor is caliph, whether the successor to Muhammad should be from his family, but he had no sons, or it should be the most worthy among them, which is how normally in Bedouin as well as Arab culture, the most worthy person leads the family, clan, and tribe. Not necessarily the son of the sheikh, but the most worthy person. So there's been a split between the Sunnis, who believe it should be the most worthy person, and the Shiite Arabs, who say it should be somebody who has the blood of Muhammad flowing through their veins. So that the Shiites are all about Fatima, the daughter of Muhammad, who married his son-in-law Ali, and they follow that route. This is the world's longest civil war. It's been going on for 1,400 years. There's not a month that goes by where there's not some Shiite mosque in Bangladesh or Pakistan that isn't blown up, because they look, Sunni Muslims look at Shiites the way we would look at a Jehovah's Witness. They don't consider Shiites real Muslims. So can you imagine? For 1,400 years they've been fighting each other over this. So for the first day, once Muhammad died, the house has been divided. Okay, next slide.
The bigger are for the Shiites.
Yeah, the Sunni Muslims are the majority.
Have you explained that?
But not where I live. In the country I live in, the Shiites are the majority. Of course, they're the majority in Iran.
Have you explained the difference between them?
Yeah.
You did.
How do I explain the difference?
No.
Have you?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. I was just stalling for time while we get this done.
Oh, yes.
I read it.
Keep talking.
Tricky.
Keep asking questions.
I read this week that Mura said to Khomeini, you will take the world, if you take over, you will take the world back 300 years. And he said, my desire is to take the world back 1400 years.
Well, yes, because what he means by that is that there, in the Muslim worldview, it's looking back to the golden age of Islam. They don't call it the golden age, they call it Ayyam Rashidun, which means the era of Islam of the rightly guided ones. That's referencing the successors, the first four successors of Muhammad, for example, Abu Bakr. Abu Bakr, you probably have heard that name before because he's the one that gave Aisha, his 6-year-old daughter, in marriage to Muhammad, which he consummated at age 9. So he's probably better known than some of the others. But there's Ali, there's Omar. They want to go back to the age of the rightly guided. But out of the 4 caliphs, the so-called rightly guided caliphs, only one died in their bed. The others were killed or murdered. So why they call that a golden age? That's our term, but they call it Ayyam Rashidun, or the era of rightly guided caliphs. Is beyond me. But that's very true. And that's why when Khomeini came to power 40 years ago this month, he lowered the age of marriage for girls to age 9. Why? Because Muhammad was the perfect man. And we want to model the most perfect man that ever lived. That is not my granddaughter. I don't know what this is.
Just waiting for my computer to decide to work.
What did you say the definition of caliph?
Successor.
Okay.
Yes.
So what is puzzling me, really puzzling me, where did Bukhari get this same, where did he have them from?
So he had to, they went around and asked people. And people would say, well, my great-great-great-great-grandfather said this. And they wrote it down. And he collected 600,000, of which he said only 7,000 plus are sahih, which means true. And there are variants among the different collections. But it was imperative, because this is a religion of being rightly guided. And how can you be rightly guided unless you know what to do every day for every single... Okay, this is your chance. Questions, comments, while we try to get this PowerPoint going again.
When you say religion is made by man,
Yes.
I shan't say religion, our Christian beliefs, right, is from one who is so superior, so great, that is just outbalances everything else.
Okay.
Right? And we should not, as Christians, be afraid of Muslims.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Because we have a true living God. And if they think that they are going to wherever they're going, when at the end, through killing somebody, then I'm afraid they're mistaken. So at the end of the day, whatever they want to do, let them go.
There was a time where you could do that, but when you started bringing them in to Western societies, Western Europe, Scandinavia, in the millions, it's really hard to take that attitude because they're right there. If they're back in their homeland, and all these people that have come have a homeland, all of them, without exception. They're not like the Jewish people that had no homeland, had no state. Every single Muslim migrant to Europe and Scandinavia has a homeland, had a passport, has a flag, they have an ambassador to the United Nations. So, but once they left their homeland and came here, it's hard to say let them get on with it, because what they do affects you. For example, in France, we had a Q&A. It was hilarious. Of course, I don't know French. It had to be translated. And so I'm waiting for a question. And it's finally translated. And this French person was irate and said, it's terrible that my children can no longer have ham sandwiches in the school buffet in our schools. And I thought, okay, I kept a straight face, and I tried my best to answer her comment. But it's hard to say, let them do what they want and be done with it, because it will affect your life. And that's a very silly example. And actually, the way I answered this lady, I said, look, I think what your question really is that you've let these people come to your homeland of France. They've established a parallel society. They haven't come to become French men and French women. And that's what you're talking about, the lack of assimilation. Yeah. And that was translated. And then her answer was translated, yes, I guess that is what I mean. And so I said, well, let me just say this. You are a relativistic society. There's no black and white anymore in European Western society. You've brought in migrants that still believe in moral absolutes. They still believe in things they're even willing to kill themselves for. We, on the other hand, my generation, we grew up with John Lennon's wonderful melody. Don't care for the words, but wonderful melody. You know, imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us. Above us, only sky. Imagine all the people living for today. Oh, not for the future. But you brought in migrants who believe in heaven and hell. They're against abortion. They're against all these hot button issues, which I won't go on to because I have a different lecture here today. But you get what I'm saying. So I said to this French woman, I said, what exactly are you asking them to assimilate to? They are not a relativistic culture. You should have considered that before you gave them citizenship.
That's right.
But they didn't think of that.
We've appeased them.
What's that?
We have appeased these people, the Muslims.
The peas?
Appease.
To appease.
Yes.
Yeah.
We appease, yeah. No, look, it's fine. It's fine if they want to live here, even in their millions. I mean, you can bring 1 billion of them if you want. But look at my situation. By law, I should be a Lebanese citizen. I hired a lawyer, and I paid lots of money, and I filled out all the forms, and everything's fine. In fact, I was off the charts qualified to become a Lebanese citizen. I really needed it because I only have one passport, which is an American one, and it's been useless in the Arab Muslim world my whole life, especially the last 40 years. And everything was fine, and I didn't get it. So, long story short, I met with the Prime Minister of Lebanon. And in the course of the conversation, she said, by the way, Your Excellency, such and such happened to me as far as applying for citizenship. And he knows that I lived there during the war when 1 million Lebanese immigrated overseas. I went there with my 2 little girls. We lived through the war. Early 80s. The war between Israel and the PLO. We were there. He knew that. And I said to him, Excellency, I'm not getting my citizenship. And he said, Mr. Sacker, the law says that you should get citizenship. And we'll never honor that law. And I understood. He didn't have to say anything else. What he was saying was, we don't mind, Mr. Sacker, if you want to come and live here even for 100 years, but we're not going to give you citizenship. Because if you have citizenship, you have the right to vote. And if you have the right to vote, you can shape society. And we don't want you to come and change our society. And that's why Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and the Gulf countries didn't take any Syrian refugees, which we've been working with for 8 years. Since 2011, we have outreach to the Syrian refugees in the Bekaa Valley. And pressure was put on the Obama administration to do something about that. He said he would, but nothing came of it. And instead, they came not to China. They didn't immigrate to China. They weren't taken to India. They came here. Particularly fall 2015. You know what I'm referring to. So, what was the slide? Okay, then the next slide. So that was all extra. While we got this going again. This is the man that T.E. Lawrence, Thomas Edward Lawrence, later famous as Lawrence of Arabia, he went out before World War I to work under this famous British archaeologist, the dig in Carchemish. And this is taken from a Muslim site. Here, his name is Hogarth, son of Reverend Hogarth, the Oxford archaeologist that Lawrence worked with. In fact, that's where Lawrence first picked up his Arabic. And then World War I broke out, of course, in 1914. But he says here, no one regarded by any section of the human race as perfect man has ever been imitated so minutely. The conduct of the founder of Christianity has not governed the ordinary life of his followers. Moreover, no founder of religion has left on so solitary an eminence as the Muslim apostle. That's very convoluted English. But basically, he's contrasting Jesus and Muhammad. Next slide. There's a Quran. Give the idea of the size of it. Next. So this was put up in Texas last year, 2019. It's actually not accurate. The number is not 600, but 900. But the rest of it is true.
Tell them what happened to the broken hairs.
Well, we had the wife of
Vince
a leader of some party, right?
Vince Cable.
Vince Cable.
Vince Cable.
And she actually left in a huff.
No, she's broke in.
She said, "This is propaganda because it said 600 and I said 900. This is wrong. I'm right." And she thought so. Jane actually urged. She said, "Look, we're having a Q&A. You can ask Mr. Sacker anything you want." But she left.
She thought it was all propaganda on there, and then you said,
and I said,
"This is all from the Quran."
Yeah. This is also Muhammad, the perfect man. Okay, so this is somebody that paid a lot of money to rent this billboard or whatever it's called by some highway in Texas. Married a 6-year-old, slave owner and dealer, rapist. That's referring to the Jewish wife he took. There was a Khaybar, the Battle of Khaybar, where Muhammad and his men went and they beheaded 900 Jewish Arabs, Arab Jews, which are mentioned in Acts chapter 2. Remember, the Arabs also came up to Pentecost. And he took a Jewish woman as a wife. He killed her husband and her brother and her father and married her. Former rape. Beheaded 900 Jews in one day, 13 wives, 11 at once, tortured and killed unbelievers. Okay, next. So this policeman, Muslim policeman, I don't know if you recognize that uniform or not. It could be from this country. Maybe it's from Australia. I don't know. But notice that his mustache is shaved. Why? Because the Sunnah says that's how Muhammad groomed himself. Next slide. Here's nope, we're missing a slide. Can you go back? One more? Go back one more?
That's not one.
No? That's not it. Well, how odd. Okay. Go back. I had a nice picture of a British Muslim, very handsome man, who had the same, how could it just disappear?
It's your revised one, it's not one.
Oh, okay. Yeah, all right. I mean, he's also handsome, but I mean, this other guy looked very, very good. Okay, next. So this, for some reason, who knows why, but back in 2002, this caught the world's imagination. This woman here had a child out of wedlock. She was brought before Sharia court, and she was condemned to death. And somebody decided to make an issue of it. We don't seem to make an issue of what happens in Saudi Arabia, but for some reason, this captured the world's imagination. And there was a big move to do something about this tragedy. So why was she sentenced to death by Sharia court? This is why. Muhammad and the woman who committed adultery. A woman came and said to Muhammad, "I've committed adultery, cleanse me." But he sent her away. The next day she returned, "Do not send me away, I'm pregnant." Muhammad replied, "Go away until the child is born." After the child had been born, she returned with the child and said, "This is the child I gave birth to." Muhammad replied, "Go away and nurse the child until it is weaned." Once the child was weaned, she came to Muhammad. The child came holding a piece of bread in his hand. He was 2 years old, according to the time prescribed by the Quran for breastfeeding. The woman said, Messenger of Allah, behold, I have weaned him, and he's eating solid food. Muhammad gave the child to a Muslim, and then pronounced the sentence. And the woman was buried up to her chest and stoned. Sahih Muslim. So there's no discussion because it's a Sahih Muslim. And the Sharia law in Nigeria just couldn't. Why is the whole world coming down on us like a ton of bricks? This is the crime. And Muhammad himself said this is what has to be done in this situation. They were simply applying Muhammad's own example and Sharia law to this woman in her case. I'm happy to say that the pressure was so strong that they actually relented and her life was spared. But this is what Muhammad himself called for. Next slide. Okay, this is a reenactment. This is in Iran. Next. There he is.
Out of sync.
There, he's out of sync. There's the British Muslim. See again, the shaved mustache, but beard. Thank you. Next. Next. Next.
Can I just ask?
Next.
This story of the you just had about the woman caught in adultery, or no, the woman who had committed adultery.
Yes.
And the rules. Those are the rules. That's what happens. So that's what we do. Does that affect the whole way, the whole creativity within the Muslim culture?
Yes, the Shia are in trouble with the Sunnah in that the Shia take liberties, and that's forbidden. That's one of the reasons. In fact, Sunnis call Shiites behind their back, they call them polytheists, which is a term reserved for Christians because of the Trinity. But they actually call them polytheists, which is a grave insult in Islam. And one of the reasons is because they have this idea that they can add. Khomeini was making pronouncements that were not exactly in the Quran or the Hadith. And this is wrong. And it really, the Sunnis say, this creates fitna or chaos. When you start, it's like extra biblical accounts,
So
like the Gospel of Barnabas.
Like Wahhabi Islam, which is very strong.
Wahhabism.
So strict.
Yeah, but not just Wahhabism. Sunnism, period, says you cannot add to the Hadith or to the Quran. And so what the Shia are doing is a grave offense. That's another reason why they don't accept them. Okay, so that woman, this is a reenactment of something that actually happened in Iran. Go back one slide. Why did this happen? Because this is what Sharia law calls for. Okay, next. Now, Muhammad, and notice that he's notice that he's holding a Quran there. Okay, next slide. Now,
Does anything happen to the men in these jobs?
You will find. Yeah, I'll give you an example. Yeah. There are things that can happen to men as well. But Muhammad was a Jew for about a year and a half. Why? He was kicked out of his hometown of Mecca. They refused to embrace his for simplicity's sake, let's just call it the new religion of Islam. I've already told you it's not a new religion, but they refused it, and he had to leave. And he went 600 kilometers north, or 300 miles north, to a place called Yathrib, which today we call Medina, which simply means city, meaning the city where the Arab prophet is buried. And there are a lot of Arab tribes up there and oases up in that area. And he immediately tried to ingratiate himself to the Jews and said, I'm a prophet of Allah. And they said, who's that? And because the Jews already had a name for God, Elohim, Adonai, Hashem, and so on. Here he's coming on saying Allah. And as he's dialoguing with them, they basically said, well, are you Jewish? No. Oh. And they ignored him. Well, he tried even harder. So for a year and a half, his Jewish faith, he fasted Yom Kippur along with his followers. He prayed 3 times a day facing Jerusalem because the Jews prayed 3 times a day facing Jerusalem. But in a period of a year and a half, 18 months, he realized he wasn't getting anywhere. They weren't receiving him as a prophet. And so he turned against them and warred against the Arab Jews. Actually killed them in battle. So here, he says, we're no longer going to pray towards Jerusalem because he knew that Jerusalem was the city of the prophets, because he grew up as a city boy. He's not a Bedouin. He's from the city of Mecca. He knew there was a church down the street. The Syrian Orthodox Church was established in Mecca. His own first wife, Khadijah, was a relative of the bishop of Mecca. So he knew the Christian story, and of course they were Jews as well. So he knew that Jerusalem was the city of the prophets. But when the Jews refused to accept him, he said, from now on, we're going to face Mecca. And so that's why these Muslims in Jerusalem, in this slide, their backs are turned toward Jerusalem, and they're facing down to Arabia, towards Mecca. This was Muhammad's. And then he changed from 3 times prayer daily to 5 times. In fact, he had a nocturnal journey, it's called, on some sort of fanciful horse called Barak, or Burak in Arabic. So Barack Hussein Obama, the late president of the United States, his name Barak is actually named after that special creature that took Muhammad from Arabia a couple thousand miles north to Mount Moriah, to Jerusalem, and from there he went up to the 7 heavens. First heaven he met Adam, 3rd heaven he met Jesus, 7th heaven he sat down with Allah himself, and they hammered out the 5 pillars of Islam, and that's where he eventually negotiated with Allah for 5-time daily prayer. Next slide. The newspaper of choice, that's why I chose that particular slide, because I wanted to give this credibility. So what we have here is the phenomenon of ISIS or Daesh in Arabic. An idea, someone already said, I'm sorry, I think it was you, the Muslims want to go back 1,400 years. Was that you that said that? Oh, that's essentially what's happening here. This is what's happening here. With ISIS appearing on the scene, they're trying to get back to the golden age, so-called, of the caliphs, the first caliphs. This says here, in that bright white circle, says Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. Allah is this word right here. So Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. This says there is no God but Allah. And this says الدولة الإسلامية بالعراق والشام. The Islamic Republic in Iraq and Sham. Sham is the name of the area of the following countries: Israel, the PA, Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan. That's called Sham. And there it is. And you can see Bilad al-Sham, it takes in all the countries that I just named. See that? Now that was the beginning. First thing they did was get rid of flags and get rid of borders. No flags, no borders, no nation states. Why? Because in Islam there are no nation states. That's a Western invention. Of course. We invented it. I mean, this used to be called Christendom. There were no nation states until much later in our history. Am I right? In Islam, there's no kingdoms either. So the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan is illegitimate. The Saud royal family in Arabia is illegitimate. That has to go because there is no monarchy in Islam. So they were starting out here and they were going to go all the way to Mecca and destroy the Kaaba, which ISIS considered that idolatry, so they were going to destroy the Kaaba. Next slide. This is another resource that I encourage you to write down, answering Islam. Don't forget this in the middle. It's not underscore, but right there, .org. Very, very helpful. So there are only 2 links I'm giving you: sunnah.com, sunnah.com, and this one. I like this one because it's written, a lot of the articles are written by former Muslims. So it's very helpful. Answering Islam. Okay, so this is, ISIS is now around. In August of 2014, they took Mosul, and then they took, 2 weeks later, they took the largest Christian city in Iraq, Karakosh, and then they took Raqqa. Well, not just Raqqa. There were many Syrian cities, but they established some sort of capital in Raqqa and started applying Islam, the pure Islam, to the territory that they were under control. And you remember the tug-of-war, where we were bending over backwards to say this is not Islam. The FCO has a policy of not even using the phrase Islamic terrorism. because the Islam is a religion of peace, and if there's any terrorism, it's an aberration, and in fact, Muslims are the victims of terrorism. So that phrase is not even used. I don't know if you're aware of that. But any official document comes out of the FCO in London will not use that phrase. Okay, so what we had was, now when we saw this, we knew that, this is like going back to the 8th century. This guy, the first sentence says that he's crucified because because he's a spy, jasus in Arabic, and then he gives his full name, and then the court that sentenced him to crucifixion. Next slide. There's another example. This guy, according to the charges here, it says he rose up against the Muslims and planted an explosive device in this very square. That's what it says in Arabic. Next. Notice the children. Go back up a bit. You remember those pictures that children are there and around? I mean, it became normalized in a sense, much like beheading in Saudi Arabia is normalized. Okay, next slide. All right, so where did that come from? Because The Economist magazine and the New York Times and Time and Newsweek and Washington Post were making great exertions to explain to their readership that this is not Islam. But let's read this. This is from Surah chapter 5, in Arabic, Al-Ma'idah, which means the table. Those who wage war against Allah and His Messenger and strive to spread corruption in the land should be punished by death, crucifixion, the amputation of an alternate hand and foot, or banishment from the land. A disgrace for them in this world, and then a terrible punishment in the hereafter. Verse 34, unless they repent before you overpower them. In that case, bear in mind that God is forgiving, or Allah is forgiving and merciful. Why am I dwelling on this? Because, my dear friends, you can now take your cell phone, your smartphone, type in www.sunnah.com. Type in the search engine crucifixion, and the Quranic verse will pop right up. So you don't have to have an economist level of understanding of Islam. You can do better than that. You can go to their own sources and read it in your own mother tongue, English. It's there. That's why I say that they've lost the narrative. They are losing control because of social media and technology. Yes. So that was a verse verbatim from the Quran. This is from a hadith, a commentary on this. The punishment of those who wage war against Allah and His apostle and strive with might and main for mischief through the land is execution or crucifixion, or the cutting off of hands and feet from opposite side or exile from the land most merciful. Was revealed about the polytheists. Who are the polytheists? Who?
Christian.
Thank you. Christians.
Yeah.
And the Shia. Well done. If any of them repents before they are arrested, it does not prevent from inflicting on him the prescribed punishment which he deserves. Next. Okay. Jane asked me, well, is anything done to the men? All right. Ibn Abbas, may Allah be pleased with him, narrated, that's what that acronym stands for, narrated that the messenger of Allah, in parentheses, prayers and peace be upon him and his family, said, quote, whoever you find doing as the people of Lot did, i.e. sodomy, homosexual sodomy, kill the one who does it and the one to whom it is done. And if you find anyone having sexual intercourse with an animal, kill him and kill the animal. Related by Muhammad, prayers and peace be upon him and his family. Somehow the Arabic didn't turn up there. And the 4 imams. Next slide. So yes, things happen to men too. Can you read that in the back, or do I need to...
Oh, you're wrong.
Is it clear? Okay, so no to Islamophobia, no to racism, fascism, yes to equality and diversity. LGBTQ against Islamophobia. Next slide. What's going on here?
Crazy.
Huh? It's crazy, is it not?
Yeah. It's the devil.
Huh?
It's the devil from both sides.
And you know, and these young people up there, they to me, they look educated, maybe even articulate, who've taken time from their schedule, taken time off from maybe during their coffee break to go and demonstrate on behalf of a religion that treats their community like this. What is going on here? How do you explain this? How do you even talk to people? I was talking to Robin Aldridge. We were talking about a certain group, and he said to me, "You know, Robert, this group, I don't think that you can persuade them. They're not, I forgot the term you used, Robin, but they're convinced of their position, and you're not going to unconvince them. So I don't wade into a gay pride parade and engage in conversation and say, hey, why do you do this? There's something going on," my sister suggested, spiritual. Something spiritual here. How do Western young people, taking to the streets on behalf of a religion that treats their lifestyle that way? There was a man named Bruce Bauer, an American writer. He was an enemy of Christianity. He wrote a book about Christianity has been hijacked, and believed that America was becoming a Christian fascist state. So he left in the mid-90s with his Norwegian male lover, and they moved to the most tolerant city in the world, Amsterdam. During their sojourn there, the head of Queer Nation, which is one of the oldest and most respected gay advocacy groups in America, the head of Queer Nation came to be a guest of Bruce Bauer and his male lover. And while they were, Bruce and his Norwegian lover were showing the head of Queer Nation the canals, the cities of Amsterdam, evidently, I don't know what they were doing. Maybe they were holding hands, maybe they were kissing, I don't know. But Arab Muslim men on the streets of Amsterdam saw it, and they beat up Bruce Bauer and his friends, guests from America. Beat them up. And then, of course, we had Pinfontaine, the Dutch politician, that was killed. And then we had Van Gogh, the film producer, who was murdered in the streets of Amsterdam because he had done a film with a Somalian woman by the name of Ayaan Hirsi Ali. And so a Muslim who'd been given refuge in Holland, given citizenship in Holland, because Van Gogh made that documentary about the oppression of women in Islam, he paid for it with his life. His dying words were, "Can we not talk about this?" Google it. The shock of being stabbed and all that. He wasn't dead yet, and probably was pushing this guy away. Hey, can we not talk about this? And then once he killed Van Gogh, he pinned a message as to why he did it with his knife onto his chest. So Bruce Bauer then left to Norway, which is the homeland of his lover. And he started writing books. And I've waited for years for this. I've waited for years for now the National Organization of Women to come out against FGM, female genital mutilation. They haven't done it because these young women and now believe in moral equivalency. In other words, no culture is superior to another culture. So to make a judgment against FGM, which is practiced in X culture, is to say your Y culture is superior in some way. So the National Organization of Women should be on the forefront of something like this, but they're not. However, Bruce Bauer, who's still an enemy of the Christian faith, has written some excellent books on this subject because he thought that America was going to become a Christian fascist state and somehow homosexual sodomy would once again be outlawed and an arrestable offense, as it was when I, in my generation, that's exactly what it was. Texas being the last state to remove it from the law books. So he thought Christianity was the threat to the LGBTQ community. Little did he know that Islam will actually kill you for it. So I'm not saying he's softened to Christians, but he's smart enough to realize that I can live my lifestyle in a Judeo-Christian culture. I cannot live my lifestyle in a Muslim culture. The other one is the brilliant Douglas Murray, another homosexual man, British, who wrote a couple of books, but one book he wrote 2017. Oh, there he is, yeah. This came out in 2017. A tremendously articulate book. The best chapter is chapter 13. It's called Tired. Tired. T-I-R-E-D. We are tired. We're tired. We're just tired. Yes, we know that there's problems and we don't know what to do with these migrants who are establishing parallel societies. Look, I'm a French Huguenot. Your country saved my people. Your king put out a proclamation throughout the kingdom and said, I want you to welcome our compatriots. So 50,000 of us came over at one go from France to here. And my ancestors worshipped at the Huguenot Church in Threadneedle Street in London. Thank you very much. But it took 200 years, 2 centuries to assimilate us. Of course. Because my family had a language and a very proud culture and literature. We weren't interested in becoming Anglos. The French Huguenots of Germany assimilated much quicker. Why? Because Napoleon attacked Germany. And so all these French Huguenot enclaves in Germany, which weren't learning German and were not assimilating, they weren't drinking beer and eating pretzels, they were still drinking wine. When they saw Napoleon attacking the country and the people that gave them haven, the German people, overnight, the French Huguenots stopped French. And they started speaking German at home, and now you can see French names in Germany. There's one famous politician, doesn't come to me right now, very French, but they assimilated. But the same thing happened in America. America was the first country in the world that had this idea, let's have a multiracial society. Not a multicultural society, but multiracial. So English was spoken from Maine, New England, all the way down to San Diego, California, and from Key West in Florida, 90 miles off the coast of Cuba, all the way to Seattle, Washington. An enormous area. But you could speak English wherever you went in America. Why? Because it was a monocultural country, but it was a multiracial culture. And that was interesting. And it worked. It's unraveling now, but it did work. So, Douglas Murray, as a homosexual man, as somebody who's very much in favor of the LGBTQ agenda, and he's not shy to talk about it. He identifies himself that way. You can go to YouTube, type him in. But I really recommend you read his book. But I waited for these people to appear. I waited years. I said, when are they going to wake up and realize it's not evangelical Christians that they're are an existential threat to their community, but it's Islam. And just recently, I was reading the paper The Times, and that Jane bought, and there was a demonstration by Muslim Britons because there was a curriculum that was brought in that week talking about the LGBTQ, and the article was about these Muslim women were outside the gates of the school and said, "Look, we're sending our kids here to learn how to read, how to write, do math. We don't appreciate this indoctrination." So right there, you have. How are you going to square the circle there? It's a problem. Because you're bringing a culture of people that have moral absolutes into a relativistic culture. Good luck. All right. Douglas Murray, Glitters in the Gloom. His pessimism about multiculturalism is so well constructed and written, it's almost uplifting. Liberals will want to rebut him. I should warn them that they will need to argue harder than they have ever argued before. But get his book. Read his book. Get a used copy off of Amazon. Read the book. Next slide. Another one I recommend, Christopher Caldwell writes for the New York Times Magazine. Reflections on the Revolution in Europe. Can Europe be the same with different people in it? These are people who are anti-Christian. Douglas Murray calls himself a Christian atheist. A Christian atheist. In other words, he appreciates the fact that the culture and the society that he lives in was formed and molded by a Judeo-Christian worldview. He acknowledges that, which is more than the European Constitution was willing to acknowledge, if you remember that big brouhaha. Bruce Bauer, this is the man that moved from Amsterdam to Norway. How Radical Islam is destroying the West from within, Bruce Bauer. The New Quislings, how the international left used the Oslo massacre to silence debate over Islam. You remember the Norwegian man that went to a socialist youth camp, and he killed everyone he could find. But Bruce Bauer saying, as horrendous as that is, the Norwegian government is using that as a way, let's not talk about the parallel society that's in Norway today, shutting down all debate. And this frightens Bruce Bauer. Already, if I could just say what Angela Merkel did not think of when she said in the fall of 2015, to the Muslim migrants coming from Iraq and Syria, if you can get here, you can stay here. And so, we're working with Syrian refugees. We show up and, hey, where's Muhammad? He's on his way to Germany. Oh, people just took off like that. Boom. For them, it's like winning the Nobel Peace Prize, or the Nobel Prize, I should say, not Peace Prize. No, or like winning the lottery. Think about it. We're working primarily among illiterate Syrian refugees. They cannot read, so we don't distribute Bibles or literature. We distribute SIM chips, because everybody, the poorest Syrian refugee, has a cell phone. But these are people who are illiterate. Nevertheless, they didn't need a visa to Turkey. Flew to Turkey, from Turkey, made their way over to Greece, and Greece eventually to Germany. I was asked to come and help out, so I went, because the Greek evangelical community don't know Arabic, so we flew from Beirut to Thessaloniki, then drove an hour north to the border of Macedonia and Greece. And there I saw a river of humanity. You saw the images on TV, but it's another thing to see it live. To see it go 24 hours a day. 99% of them were young men. In other words, they were coming to stake a claim, and then the family would follow them. All well-dressed. Everybody had a cell phone. In fact, one NGO, there are all kinds of NGOs. The Scandinavian NGOs provided first aid. One NGO called No Borders, provided hot tea. Another NGO provided places to charge your phone. And they had real time. So I was talking, and these people were in a hurry, so it's difficult. I thought, what are we going to do exactly? So we're passing out Bibles and trying to talk. They're in a hurry. And so I asked one guy, I said, he was a Syrian. And I said, when did you get here? Today. How long did it take you? Well, 24 hours. No, since you left Syria, how long did it take you? 24 hours. I thought he was going to say 2 weeks. I said, what do you mean 24 hours? And of course, he knew from my accent that I was from Lebanon. And he said, I just flew because Arabs don't need a visa to Turkey. He flew to Izmir. Izmir is on the water. Izmir is former Smyrna. He took a boat to Lesbos. And from Lesbos, he took the ferry to Piraeus, Greece. And then he took a bus for €35 to 550 kilometers to the Macedonian border. And these buses were like a train, just going constant turnaround. And we would knock off late in the afternoon, almost at sunset, but it never stopped. It was 24 hours a day, going in. And so this guy I was talking to, there was a guy next to him, and he said and I was using my Arabic name, and he said, listen, what do you think about Norway? I said, Norway? And he said, yeah, do you know anything about it? I said, what do you care about Norway? So, well, I heard it's a good place to go to. And I said, well, I think you should go where you've been invited. You've been invited to Germany, go to Germany. Yeah, but I've heard about Norway. Don't you know anything about it? And I said, yeah, but I don't think you have a chance to get up there. Just go to Germany. Yeah. Then he looks at me and he says, well, what country are you going to? So I said, I'm going back to Lebanon. And he looks at me like this, like I'm a crazy man. Who's he talking to? what am I doing there on the Greek-Macedonia border if I'm going back to Lebanon? I just left them. Okay. Okay, this is some artwork. And what do you call that kind of artwork? Anyone know? Performance art? No.
Prophetic.
No. What kind of artwork is that?
Rubbish.
What?
Rubbish.
Yeah, besides that, I'm sure there's a technical term.
Yeah.
Anyway, this is
Oh, sorry.
somebody took this artwork and they put this on here. Next slide.
Yeah.
Growing slowly, the tree will ironically hang its benefactor. So, next slide. Next slide. Next slide.
That's the end.
That's the end.
So that's the last.
I'm so glad because my voice is giving out. I don't know how we're going to go till 6 o'clock. Maybe if we take a half-hour break, we can continue.
It's a question.
So, we can do questions and answers or comments. I prefer those people that disagree with me be given priority and ask the first questions. Because I learn more from my critics than I do from those that agree with me. So, but please, are there any... I'll tell you what, don't disappear, don't leave, but stand up at your seat and stretch, and then please sit right back down.
Yeah, no, I'm just filling questions. It doesn't let anyone know.
Okay, please be seated. Those that need to go, please feel free to go because our time is up. Those that want to remain and ask questions, please feel free to do so. Thank you.
Robin and I have to leave at 4:30
Yeah.
because we've got something this evening.
Of course, we'll probably
So
wrap
please,
up by then.
I don't.
No, no, we're not going to go on.
No, of course not.
We'll
I
finish
don't want to.
We will, may I have your attention, please? We're over time. Please feel free to go. Absolutely. But I will not go later than 4:30 for a question and answers. That means 20 minutes or less. But please do feel free. If you need to get up, do so. Okay. May I have the first question or comment, please? Yes, question in the back.
I'm not disagreeing with anything you said, except that the European Union want the British government to stop calling any of these attacks that we suffer terrorism due to Islam. Where do we go next? It's a lie. So where do we go next as believers in this country with a democratic voice?
First of all, we need to realize that Islam is the problem, not Muslims. Muslims are men and women who are on a spectrum, clearly. I mean, we all have Muslim neighbors, or maybe we even have a workmate, and they're not trying to kill us. You know. So the issue is, the problem with ISIS, though, is when you have a Muslim that takes their prophet literally and decides, well, I want to be a good Muslim, not what we would call a backslidden Muslim, or a carnal Muslim, or a superficial Muslim, then that's a problem. For example, the 19 Arab Muslim men that attacked New York and Washington, D.C., some of them had gone to a strip club the night before. Now, how do you process that? Well, quite simply. They knew that the following day they were going to die in the way of Allah, fi sabilillah in Arabic. And if you die a martyr, you go straight to Muslim paradise, which is a carnal paradise, as you know. And so it didn't matter what they had done the day before, drinking alcohol and going to a strip joint, because in 24 hours they were going to strike a blow for jihad, and no martyr is denied paradise. Now, no martyr is denied paradise. In fact, when a martyr dies, they are not dressed in grave clothes. Their body is not washed, and they're not wrapped in a sheet. They are buried as they died, in their dirty, bloody clothes. Why? So that Angel Gabriel in Muslim paradise can see that they are martyrs and let them right in. Because otherwise, that's the only... And imagine the incentive there. First of all, you have a world religion that has the concept of holy war. Right there, holy war. There is no concept of holy war in Jesus' teachings. The Crusades was clearly not a reflection of Jesus' teachings. He never talked about that. But if you have lived, the one Lebanese guy, he's from the Jarrah family, which, interesting enough, Jarrah means wounder. It's also what we use the word for surgeon. The surgeon cuts you. So the one lone Lebanese guy that attacked and was part of killing 3,000 people in a single morning on September 11, 2001, he was actually a carnal Muslim. But somehow the Hamburg Muslims, because it was based in Germany, somehow they said, look, you know what? You need to get your act together. He said, well, I can't change. I like the brothels and I like alcohol. And they said, but you know what? You can have all the women in the world that you could possibly think of in Jannah, which is the word for Muslim paradise. But you need to quit your lifestyle. I told you I can't quit it. Now I'm making up this dialogue. I wasn't there. But they took a secular Sunni Muslim Lebanese who was not devout. His own parents admitted to it when they were interviewed on TV. They said, we're shocked. But somehow they scratched him where he was itching. He thought, well, that's right. You know, the brothels here in Hamburg cost money. Up there, it's free. Maybe I should consider joining this attack. And as a martyr, he has to be admitted into Muslim paradise. That's the only category that's admitted straight into paradise. So you can see the incentive. But let me just say, there's a slide which I didn't show you. Noni Darwish is the former Muslim. Noni Darwish is the former Muslim who said, oh, gee, I wish I had the slide up on the... She said it so much better than I can say it. But she said, you know, Christians don't... how does it go, Jane? Christians don't behave the way their Jesus behaves, but thank God most Muslims don't behave the way Muhammad. Something like that. I have this slide, but I don't want to take time to look for it right now. So the issue is, my dear friends, the issue is not your Muslim neighbors. The issue is Islam. That's the problem.
So the problem is, what I say to my friends, the more they read the Quran, the worse they get. The more we read the Bible, the better we should get.
Well, there's another slide and another PowerPoint where I talk about this. There was a man, his name was Musab Hassan Youssef, whose father was a co-founder of Hamas. And he wrote a book called, what was his called? Son of Hamas. Son of Hamas. And Musab Hassan Youssef makes the very point that you're making. That the more you read the Quran and try to obey the example of the perfect man, the more violent you become. He himself said that. And that was, and by the way, he came to faith. If you,
we go? Like you said, the Americans got somewhere because they became very strong. Because in Islam they don't pay much attention to people who are nice or smile or timid. Where can we go as a people of God in standing up to it for the sake of our society?
yeah.
What should we and could we be doing within the body of Christ, the body of Messiah?
Well, CMJ, this is to talk about Islam. Like I said, it's too bad you came for this presentation. Manchester last night was much better. Because I was talking about the wonderful stories of Muslims coming to faith. More Muslims have come to faith in the last 4 years than the last 1,400 years. I spoke for 2 hours, nothing but good news. I mean, we walked out of there walking on air. This is a totally different presentation today, unfortunately. But CMJ, for example, what should we do is your question. CMJ is actively partnering through a CMJ initiative called At the Crossroads, which is held every 2 years. First one was 2012. It was the brainchild of the rector of Christ Church in Jerusalem, David Pileggi. Every 2 years, so that would be 2012, 14, 16, 18. So we had one last year. We won't have another one until next year. And that's where we bring Muslim background believers to the CMJ property in Jerusalem, and they meet their Messianic counterparts. CMJ, Jane should be here to coach me because some of it is not public. But CMJ is actively supporting Muslim background believing congregations in this country. And she's actually introduced me to some of them. Why would CMJ be doing that? Because they get Israel.
Yeah.
They get it.
Yeah.
How do they get it? Because they read their Bible now as Christians the way they used to read their Quran when they were Muslims, which is to say literally. So when they read Genesis 17, I'm establishing an everlasting covenant with you.
That's right.
You will be a blessing to the nations. You can't come with replacement theology to a Muslim background believer. You'll confuse her or him. Because you have to be taught replacement theology. You don't get it directly from the text. Am I right?
Yeah.
So CMJ, particularly David Pelleggi, noticed this phenomenon, as did I and my colleague, Michael Karam, because the three of us host this. But CMJ sponsors it. That Muslims that come to faith in Messiah want to come to the land. And CMJ is able to facilitate that. But it takes a lot of work to convince the Ministry of Interior and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to give visas to Iranians, a country that wants to wipe Israel off the map. It's a lot of work. But that's one reason. So you ask me, what can we do? Well, find out what CMJ is doing with these Muslim background believing churches here in the UK. And get behind it. Because, first of all, you're not a Muslim. You don't know the language. And I'm not a Muslim either. At least I know the language. You can't be a J. Smith, if you know who that is. Because J. Smith has spent a lifetime learning with it. He's a polemicist, as is Ravi Zacharias. I don't think you could be a Ravi Zacharias either, if you know who that is. These are callings. These are people who have a specific calling, and they work hard at it, and that's their gifting, and that's their contribution to the body of Messiah. But we can all be involved in being light to our Muslim neighbors. And you can talk to Jane. I don't know how much she'll tell you, but you can consider partnering and encouraging these congregations at CMJ made up of MBBs that are in this country. They're amazing. And you know, they're so on fire to give away their hope.
More on fire than most of them.
Oh, it's incredible. And they love Israel and love the Jewish people. Amazing. Questions?
We can also pray and remember that in response to the prayers of God's people, one of the churches in the world, maybe the church that's growing quickest in the world, is the Christian church in Iran.
Yes.
So, I mean, we can pray and say just pray.
No, absolutely. Actually,
the Canadians yesterday. Wow.
The fastest growing, the most church growth in the world is still China. But in the Muslim world, I would say so.
Yeah.
Have you mentioned Father Zachariah Mutras?
No, and I didn't have time to.
Oh, those two stories are just so good, though. Oh no, it's uplifting for people.
There's several.
I know, but the camel and the other one.
Are you serious?
Yeah,
we want to know about the camel.
And
All right.
the other one.
I suggested to you that if you have a question, like we should be like the Bereans. We should do due diligence. Just don't take the Economist magazine's word for it. Check it out for yourself. For example, you can go to sunnah.com, SUNNAH. I hope you wrote that down. And you've heard rumors that Muhammad said to drink camel urine for your health. All you have to do is go to sunnah.com and type in urine or camel urine. And there it is. You can see it right there. Now, the Economist magazine or the Times is not going to cover it. Why? Because you don't want to stir things up. This government has prevented former Muslims who are now evangelists and are evangelizing their fellow Muslims, their former Muslims evangelizing. This government has prevented them from coming to this country.
Yes.
This government, just a few weeks ago, I think it was December, did not want a woman that had been sentenced to death by Sharia court in Pakistan for blaspheming the Arab prophet Muhammad to come to this country because this government said it would be a risk to the community. And you can read between the lines to understand what that means. But what Jane is referring to is there's a man named Coptic priest who's evangelical, and his older brother was killed. He was sharing the Lord with Muslims in Egypt. They cut out his tongue and then they killed him. And Zakaria Butros, he's on YouTube. If you want to write his name, Zakaria, Father Zakaria Butros. Butros is spelled B as in boy, O-T as in Tom, R-U-S. It's pronounced Butros, but for some reason he spells it B-O. Butros. Zakaria, so that would be like Zechariah. YouTube it. And you may find some videos have been translated, or not translated, but with English subtitles. Okay, so he's like the J. Smith of the Arab world, but it's all in Arabic, and he has a program, satellite program, and it's seen all over. You can watch it in Auckland, New Zealand. If you're an Arabic speaker, you can watch it in Tokyo, Japan. You can watch it in Alaska. You can watch it in Peru. If you're an Arabic speaker, and he has a worldwide audience, and is shaking the world of Islam because his approach is to use Arabic sources only, Muslim sources only, and he's speaking in classical Arabic, which I cannot do. I speak a dialect. I can't speak in classical Arabic. He is able to do that. Why is that important? Because that means any Arabic speaker can understand him. So I understand them, but I can't speak that language. So many Arabs can't speak classical Arabic, but they can understand it. And so he was talking about a problem that everybody was aware of, and that is non-relative males are working in Saudi Arabia. So there's a houseboy, a groundsboy, and a chauffeur, say from Bangladesh or Pakistan. But they're not a blood relative, obviously. Yet they're living in a Saudi Arab Muslim home under the same roof as non-relatives. This is in strict violation of, not strict, this is in complete violation of Sharia law. And everyone knows what's going on. Because up until recently, women weren't allowed to drive, for example, so you had to have a chauffeur. Okay, so it's a 15-minute program, he spent 10 minutes or more laying out the problem. Which everyone knows it's a problem. Laying it out. And then he's wrapping up his program, and he's painted everyone in a corner. He's presented a problem but no solution. And it's embarrassing. He's basically airing our dirty laundry before the whole world. That we have males working in our homes that are not even blood relatives. And this is wrong, according to Sharia. And then he says, but there's a solution. Oh. And he opens up one, maybe Bukhari or maybe Sahih Muslim, one of the compilations of the Hadith. And he said, here it is. And he reads in Arabic directly from their sources. And it says that in the case of non-relative males living and working in your home, the way to be Sharia compliant. And remember, the Muslims are all about right guidance. They don't have a sin problem. It's how to live life rightly. And he says here, he starts reading, he says, according to so-and-so, he names the source, the page number, this and that, then the camera comes up and shows the actual text, and it says here, to be Sharia compliant, the mistress of the house must suckle each non-male relative at her breast. And then it mentions how many times they should suckle her breast for it to be Sharia compliant, and that person now becomes a blood relative, and the family is no longer in violation. The Muslim world exploded because it's a shame-honor culture, and living shame is living death, and honor is everything. In fact, honor is so important they'll even kill to restore their honor. And immediately there were calls, hey, we can't have non-Muslims hearing about this. But that's what I mean about the internet. Yeah. They've lost control of the narrative because instantly it spread around the world. It's all over the talk shows. The Oprah Winfrey of Egypt brought in a professor from Azhar and asked him, and she said, now in a recent episode of Batman, which is how they refer to Father Zachariah Butros. They don't say his name. That man, he said that our religion says, our religion, right? She's not aware. She's a devout Muslim, not aware, covered. And she laid out, and of course he knew what was coming. And he had nothing to say except, well, that's correct. Wow. Then, Father Zachariah Butros talked about how the prophet, the Arab prophet, recommended that people drink camel urine. So he talked about it, and he's reading through their sources, Another explosion on social media and in television. Oh my goodness. Because 99% of the Muslims, especially Pakistanis, Bangladeshis, people that don't know Arabic, they're unaware of this. But they're aware now. Because the computer. And you can find... So Islam is under tremendous pressure that it hasn't had for 1,400 years. And they really don't know where to turn. It's like fires being lit. And they're running over here and stamping out this fire. Then next they're running over here and stamping out this fire. It's a real problem.
Oh dear, I am sorry to hear that.
Yeah. So, I think those are the two stories that Jane...
You have said that when Muslim... Yeah, sorry.
Yes.
Yeah. Let's just say this is the House of Parliament, and we are a room full of MPs.
Yes.
What would you be saying to us as governors?
Okay. I'll give you a 1-minute answer because it's 29 minutes past 4 and I said I would...
I wish we couldn't...
No. You stayed longer. You stayed a half hour extra. God bless you. Cheers, Robin. Yeah, in a room full of MPs, what would I say? Well, when I was at the FCO, I gave them the unvarnished truth. And I remember thinking, well, it's the last time I'm going to be invited back. And would you believe the next year, Jane and what's his name? Tim. They said, hey, they want us back. So you never know. You never know what their reaction would be. But the MPs, some MPs, there's nothing they can do. I'll tell you what I mean by that. Ayan Hirsi Ali was a Somalian woman who suffered FGM. She fled from Somalia, went to Holland, where she was given haven, became an atheist, denounced Islam, became an atheist, learned the language fluently, assimilated 100%, except for her skin color. She was Dutch. So Dutch that she was elected to the Dutch parliament. Could give speeches in Dutch, and I don't know the rest of it. She saw that while she was a parliamentary member, that Holland was opening up their country to immigration, not to Filipinos, who are Catholic, or not to Poles, who are Catholic, but almost exclusively to Muslims. And she was alarmed because she has left her homeland and left her family and left her people, her society, her culture, and become a Dutch woman. And to get away from Islam, and here the majority of immigrants that Holland was letting in were Muslims. So she started speaking out against it in Parliament, basically saying, I'm putting words in her mouth, but if you've read her book, Infidel, you know the story, but basically saying, we cannot admit Muslims to the Netherlands because we will be undermining our culture, using the collective pronoun, our culture. She felt herself a Dutch woman. We must stop this. And she felt an existential threat as an atheist Dutch citizen who happens to be ethnic Somalian. She felt real fear because atheism is forbidden in Islam. And she says, anyone who's fleeing Islam like I am, we welcome them with open arms. But to come here and build mosques and build a parallel society, she says, I'm against this. Of course, the second largest mosque in Europe is in Rotterdam, and the mayor of Rotterdam is a Muslim, and he's a practicing Muslim. He's not an ex-Muslim like Ayan Hirsi Ali. Well, she was basically invited not only to leave the Dutch parliament, but to leave the country, and she's gone. She lives in America today, has bodyguards, and all the rest of it. And what I would say to Ayan Hirsi Ali, if I were in this room, I'd say, Ayan, that's a very quixotic campaign that you launched, because the way our laws are, we do not discriminate. We have freedom of religion. Our societies do not discriminate. We would never do that. Obama was asked to discriminate in favor of refugees, Christian refugees, fleeing Iraq and Syria because they were in mortal danger of ISIS. And he said we would never do that. That's un-American. We would never discriminate in favor of one group as opposed to another. But the follow-up question never came. The follow-up question should have come to President Obama would have been this. But wait a minute, your administration has made it official policy to discriminate officially in favor of the LGBTQ community that's under threat in the Muslim world. And that's absolutely true. I dealt with one guy. In 1 year, the American Embassy in Beirut, they gave him a place to live, the American taxpayer paid the rent, gave him a food allowance, clothing allowance, English lessons, and in 12 months, he was in America. He was fast-tracked because the Obama administration had an official policy of discrimination in favor of the LGBTQ community. Yet the follow-up question was never asked. When he said, that's un-American, that question is un-American, we do not discriminate, we would not... Why didn't the journalists think to ask that? But wait a minute, you're already discriminating in favor... Because they're in mortal danger. Well, the Christians were in mortal danger in Iraq and Syria. Time's up. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Bye.